The so-called breakthrough biological explanation of the human condition is probably not so much a breakthrough as perhaps the byproduct of someone's mental breakdown. For those of you who haven't watched the video interview of Jeremy Griffith by Craig Convey on it, it's not so much of an explanation as a type of brainwashing really, basically repeating the same things over and over and mentioning a few odd statements for over an hour, all of which could pretty much be summarized in a single sentence. Well, not quite. You also need some context to it. Anyway, just like any other religious and spiritual messages, it doesn't rely on relaying useful information but rather on mentally affecting you to subconsciously adopt their persona that supposedly has a somewhat pleasant and calming mental effect for some people. Just like most other religious and spiritual messages and political propaganda, it also tries to impair your ability to think rationally and stop you from consciously picking up the information they're trying to make you believe. It's straight out toxic to listen to if you want to develop your mind to be more intellectually, rationally and scientifically grounded. I would recommend you not to listen to it too much or preferably not at all, because the more you listen to it the more likely you are to fall for it. For those of you who want to find out its content in a more digestible format, this video is an attempt to try to break it down and summarize its content and compare it to reality. You know, the place these people should check their statements with. It's worth noting that I'm only taking the information from the video interview, and not the book or anything else. Still though, seeing as it's over an hour of hogwash that's supposedly a summary of the message in the book, I doubt that the book will hold something worth reading and therefore I'm definitely not going to waste my precious time reading it. The reason I'm even tackling this in the first place on this channel is that my channel is making videos on how social issues in human society can actually be solved, and they're based on way more scientific and practical methods than this nonsense. Yet these individuals are shameless enough to take people's money for lying to and deceiving them like this, when all they're sprouting is absolute lies that are neither based on science nor can solve what they claim it can. You'll see how absolutely absurd it is when I break it down, and why these guys ought to be locked up in a psychiatric hospital, and especially that guy who they claim is a biologist. To summarize the video, simply put, this guy Craig Conway interviews this other individual Jeremy Griffith about this amazing message that can solve the so-called human condition. It's supposed to quote solve the underlying cause to all the chaos and suffering in human life. Now what is this so-called amazing thing that this so-called biologist has come up with? Surely it's something scientific, right? No, according to him, the issue is about good and evil. Sigh. Now, I know the liberal, humanitarian and religious parts of humanity believe good and evil are actually fundamental things that exist. The thing is though that good and evil and right and wrong doesn't really exist, at least not on a fundamental scientific level. Let me explain it to you. There are things we do that are smart, dumb, wise and foolish. But those things are relative and can be very different depending on what goal you try to achieve and what methods you use to achieve them. Still, those things are relatively clearly defined depending on the situation. Due to it being beneficial for individuals to cooperate with and work for each other, one has established a concept called morals that condemn or commend doing certain things that are or aren't beneficial to those other parties. Seeing as how everyone and every party needs people to do things that benefit them, they establish their own so-called morals that benefit them if others follow them and therefore impose them on others. Therefore, it's really nothing more than a set of rules that people try to make you feel trash for disobeying, but due to them being so fundamental to make humanity prosper, some version of them are at least accepted by all people on a subconscious level. Even for those people that don't like them and are in high positions of power, and one may think they don't really need to care about following a moral code, still have to follow some version of them to some degree. If they didn't, even they wouldn't be able to survive. For example, if a sovereign ruler has no conditional loyalty to some of their subjects whatsoever, they will not only lose their positions but also die. Why? Because someone will sooner or later stab them in the back, as they would have no reason to be loyal to them in return no matter how much they're paid or given. People say money and wealth can buy everything, but there are limits when people who use them are too stupid. So morals are important, though they are far from being as fundamental as some people claim they are. Very smart people can bend these rules and still get away with it, and if there were anyone smart enough, they could disregard them completely and solely act on their own understanding and voice of reason. So basically they're the wisdom of humanity as a species to make its own kind thrive, rather than the wisdom of individuals to make themselves personally thrive. Furthermore, he mentions what is required is the psychological rehabilitation of humans. Yeah, you heard right. According to him, a biologist claims that the answer to fixing these things is getting people to rehabilitation. Then why didn't you bring a psychologist instead? Does that mean that psychology is superior to biology? You're kidding, right? I shouldn't need to explain this part. When biology becomes advanced enough, psychology could in theory become obsolete. If you know the purity of fields of studies, you know that biology is more fundamental, and that's why. Anyway, let's find out more. He even claims it will save the world. My gosh, I hope the biologist will have more common sense, right? Jeremy Griffith says that finding understanding of our psychologically troubled human condition has been the effort of every human that has ever lived, has been dedicated to achieving, and has contributed to finding. Well, that's not true. First of all, many people have not contributed to humanity trying to find it, but rather to deceive people and make life more miserable for them for their own personal gain. Sure, for their own benefit they have tried to make themselves less miserable, but assisting to psychologically help other people to make their lives better is something many people haven't been trying to do, but quite the opposite. Does this guy think that every human is fundamentally good or something? Actually, later on it seems that that's what he claims. This guy is nuts. You really think that people that destroy their own world to satisfy their greed, those that enjoy seeing other people suffer, and those that torment others for their own entertainment are inherently good? Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, the other thing to note is that saying that people historically tried to simply deal with the psychology of humans is wrong, though. Bit further back in human history than the modern era and even today actually. People don't really believe in psychology, but rather that it was evil spirits and that kind of stuff that causes people's bad mental health and misery. One can simply call them ignorant and correct it, but that still leaves the rest of it as something totally inaccurate. Following, he says that it has been solved, the human condition. Yeah, right. People have since the dawn of history had many other issues other than just having peace of mind, like all the other things that's not right with their bodies other than the mind. Also drought, the threat of predators and other animals, natural disasters, etc. Even though they're significantly easier to handle nowadays, most of them are still here. Do these guys seriously think that just giving someone peace of mind is enough to solve these issues? Now technically they later go into that it is a gradual process, so it isn't actually solved after all. Huh? Then why didn't you simply say you have a method to solve it rather than claiming to have solved it? Anyway, he further goes on denying the whole evolutionary theory that claims that humans have become more civilized over time, and claims that our ancestors were some kind of humanoid ape-type creature that lived in peace and harmony with each other and the rest of nature. It's like some frickin' Garden of Eden nonsense. Except he claims they copied his version and not vice versa. He also says that suddenly, becoming smart enough to go off our pre-programmed path made us confused, and that's the real reason for us being violent and competing with each other, and not due to our desires to breed and thus pass on our genes as evolutionary theory teaches. The solution, he then goes on to state, is that having an understanding of this, or rather that we are innately good, is the key to solving the issue. Like some kind of half-hearted, oversimplified Buddha teaching of enlightenment being the key to fixing you. I mean, even religious people would be offended by this kind of watered-down teaching. According to him, knowing this is supposed to heal us and magically allow us to get back that paradise society of our supposed ancient ancestors had, that also can't even be classified as the same race as us.